Okay, everyone. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to show you basically what a GUI is for your optional MA10. So what a GUI in and of itself is a graphical user interface, and it's pretty much anything within an app or program that you're looking at. So you can see in PowerPoint there are many different buttons up here. Each of these buttons are technically programmed with some sort of code. You're just not seeing the behind the scenes code with it. Most programs you're going to see on like Facebook and other things are programmed in things like Java or C#. A lot of things are in C#, but like any other programming language, MATLAB has the ability to program a GUI. You can actually even send your GUI programs that you create in MATLAB to a phone or other things using other additional compilers and such, which we won't go into in this class. So before we get any farther, I'm going to kind of go over what a structure is and a couple other things to really help you understand the concepts of what you need. So a structure groups data into one container with specified fields. So your container is this variable, and your fields are three different types of things. So the fields we're going to create today for our first structure is an n×n numeric array, a string array, and a scalar value. So we're going to start off with that. Let me clear CLC. So the first thing we want, let's write these variables like you would in any other thing. So we're going to call it numeric for the first thing, and that's going to just be a vector. Now we're going to create a scalar value, so I'm going to call it scalar, and that's going to be 4. And then we're going to create a string value. So our string is going to be word. So we now have all three of these on this side. So there are three different things that we have. But we want it to be something that we can hold all together, because these individually we can't just move very easily. We have to encompass all of them each time we're moving through, and that's a little bit more difficult than what we want to be doing. So I'm going to call something a structure, and the way you create a structure is you write struct, then we're going to call the field name. I'm going to call it n for the name for the numeric field, but we're going to write numeric because that's the actual values we want to put in. The next field name we want is going to be SC for scalar. Now notice I'm putting these in quotes because these are just field names. These are just variable names. They're not actually corresponding to an actual value. So we're going to put scalar for that one. And then we're going to do ST for string. So now we have that. And if we open that up, you're going to see we have a structure with fields. Our n field has 4 by 4, 5, 6, 7 in a vector. And then we have a scalar 4, and then we have a string word. Now, if we wanted to purely just call on this 4, we can write structure dot sc. And you notice there's nothing else, and the answer over here is 4. It'd be the same thing as calling scalar. If I wrote scalar here, it would give you scalar equals 4. Structure.sc equals 4. They're the same types of thing. So we now know that this is just how we write something, and we can call on any of this information. And this information can be any which way. It can be anything that you have in there. You can even put an image as one of these fields, and you'd be fine. So I'm going to do clear CLC. So next thing we have is we have the GUI function. So when we're going to be looking at GUIs in a minute, you actually have a function that'll pop up for each GUI that you write. Each function is going to have, like any normal function, creating the function with this. You have your name of the function. Then you're going to have these three things. These three things you've probably never seen before. But what these three things are is you have HObject, which is just the handle of your object name. So each of the buttons you're going to create in a GUI, like each of these buttons. So if I was using the help button, the object is the help button. The help button in and of itself is an object. So you have to create that object, and then if you want to do anything with it, you have to call on it. Same thing, then there's the event data. So I have to call on it if I want it to do anything, but that doesn't mean that if someone presses it, calling on it is going to happen. So you have to have event data that if you press this help button, when you press down, when I click it, it's going to move to here. But that's where event data comes in. So it's a button press, it's a button click, it's a key press, it's anything like that. And then lastly, you have handles, which are the same things that'll hold through all of the different functions that you're going to see in these different like GUIs. So with MATLAB, they have this really fun, intuitive process that you can use called guide. So I'm going to open this up really quickly. He's going to start talking. Okay. So what guide is there's this awesome video on how to create a GUI with guide. So if anything that I say doesn't make sense, I would suggest coming to this video and just looking through what he's talking about. It's very it's very easy to follow along, and you can pause and listen to what he's saying. But I'm going to go into a little bit more depth about what we want you guys to do with this. So first things first, we're going to have to open up a guide function. So let's write guide, and this is how you get into the guide. So when we just type in guide into MATLAB, it's going to come up with this little quick start menu, and it'll say create new GUI or open existing GUI. As you can see, I have a bunch of existing GUIs, but right now we're just going to create a new one just to show everyone what we're going to be doing. So click OK. Now when you open yours, you're not going to have all these little like actual text next to these. So these are just going to be a bunch of little icons, which is going to be kind of confusing. So what we're going to do is go to File, Preferences, and then right here on the first thing it says Show Names and Component Palette. Click on that check mark, click Apply, click OK, and then you're going to see all these fun little text buttons. So one thing with a GUI is that you can create this and make the size of your GUI any size you want by just moving in this little black corner. So this little thing right here, if you move it in or you move it out, it'll make your size of your actual figure bigger or smaller. I would suggest not making it your entire size of your screen, because if your screen happens to be a huge screen like mine, where I have a 17-inch screen, then someone who has a 15-inch screen, it's not going to pop out correctly. It's going to be too large for their screen. So whenever you see those funky things happen on your phone where suddenly the text is too large for your phone, that's because their scaling on this is wrong. So by making it smaller, you won't have to worry about scaling. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do right now is we're going to make a simple GUI that's going to have an axis. So we're going to create an axis. So I just click the axis button, and I want it that big. I can make it bigger. I can make it wider. I can change whatever I want in it here. But that's what I like to do. So I'm going to make it that, and then I want a couple push buttons. So I'm going to create 2 push buttons. So 1 push button, and then a second push button. Now, this looks a little confusing because both things are named push button. So we want to change that. So we're going to go and double click it, and you go to the UI control, and when you get there, you're going to scroll down to string, and then highlight it and write next, and click OK. The tag on this string, though, is still push button 1. That is the name of the actual button. So when we're calling on it in our actual code, it's just going to be named push button 1. So let's also do something for this one, because just having something named push button's a little sad. So we're going to make something fun, and it's going to be super fun and be previous. I know, I'm getting wild here. Never expected. And then we're going to close it. And also, if you notice here, the tag is push button 2. And this axis also has a control panel, but we don't really need to change anything in it because most of the stuff in here is just normal things that you're going to have. So they have scaling stuff down here, and so this changes the locations of things. And so if you want to make grid lines on it, right now all of them are off, but you can turn all the grid lines on. For what we're doing, you don't need grid lines, so we're not going to turn it on. And you can also notice that they have the X controls, the Y controls, and the Z controls. So this little awesome axis thing can go into 3 dimensions if necessary. Okay, so now we want to save this, and we want to create our actual code. So we're going to click the exit button. It's going to ask us to save changes. We're going to say yes. We're going to name it something. I'm going to name it Fun with GUI, because I think GUIs are super fun. So let's move on. Okay, so now we have our code. And if you notice, it says Fun with GUI is the name of our code. And when you go over here into your actual current folder, and you can just ignore all the rest of my stuff, but there's a Fun with GUI figure and a Fun with GUI M file. So this M file is the actual thing we're looking at, and then if you click on this Fun with GUI figure, this is what our figure looks like. So without all the extra work, this is what we have. We have the next button, we have the previous button, and we have our axis. Right now, if we click anything on here, nothing's gonna happen because our code is doing nothing. We just made it look pretty so far, which is an important step, but not the only step. So next fun little thing we're gonna do is you have all of this information out. You have a bunch of functions that just came with this. And so all the functions that came with this is you're going to have your actual variable. So this is the opening function. Do not, and I repeat, do not touch anything in this function up here up until line 44. All of this is just to make sure that the GUI looks nice. And this is the fun thing with Guide, is that it allows us to do this, and we don't want to play with anything on here. We want to leave everything that's on here the same way it is. Okay, and the next thing you get is you get an opening function, you get a closing function, an output function, and you get two push button callbacks. So how when I open this GUI we have over here, you can see it, and there are two buttons on there, and there are two push button callbacks. So remember when I opened up the next button on the UI control, you saw that it had a tag that was push button 1, and then the previous one had a push button 2 tag. That's where those come from. This push button 1 is talking about the next button, and this push button 2 talking about the previous button. So one thing I would suggest to make sure you're not confusing yourself is to rename this little thing up here and just write next on it, so you know what button you're talking about. And down here, let's write previous, so we know what button we're talking about with this function. Okay. Now the next thing we want to do, we want to make sure that all these functions are closed. Do not leave your functions open. It'll get very confusing and you'll forget what you're doing. I promise. It always happens. So just keep on scrolling up until you get to the end of a function. And that's the last function. So we have all of our functions closed off. Now, moving information from one function to another. As you know, when looking at a bunch of things that you did a couple weeks ago with Riemann sums, that moving your information from one function to another is a little cumbersome, and you have to write in all those inputs and all those outputs. One of the nice things with this GUI, and what I'm going to show you, is it's an easier way to move all that information. So instead of having to write all the inputs to this function to go into this function, you're already going to have it. So here's what we're going to do. The first thing is what we're going to make is we're just going to make a function that is going to take the data that you guys got with this assignment, and it's going to just plot it. We're not going to do any of the fun stuff to it. We're just going to plot it. So to plot it, here's what we're going to do is we want to make that structure. So the first thing we need is we need to load in our data. Because just like anything else, we still have to load in. So XLS read plotting data .xlsx. Just because we still need that, there's no reason we won't. And then we're going to make our structure, and we're going to call it info. And the only two things we need in this structure are the data and a counter, which we're going to start our counter at 0. You can start it at any number you'd like. Just make sure it makes sense. Now, we can call on this and we can see what's going on, but let's say we just left it like this, and then we wrote down here and we're like, intuitively, MATLAB should just know that I'm talking about info.data, and that's what I want. Now, if I run this right now, it's going to pop up your actual figure, because right now it's only in this function. It's not seeing anything else. But if I click the next button, it's going to give me an error because it doesn't know what I'm talking about in this. So we want to make sure we know what we're talking about. And the way to make sure we know what we're talking about is using the form set app data and this other thing that we're going to do in a second, get app data. But first, you have to write your object that you want. So you can see right here, it tells you what you need. So the object we're going to assign to this is handles.figure1, which is our actual object that we have. So this figure itself, this is our figure 1 figure. So we want to assign the data to this figure. So first that, and then we want to name it, and let's name it info, because then we don't have to worry about changing up things. And then we want to assign info to this. Now, this is all we have to write because all of our data that we need is directly in this info button. So now when we go down to here, before we write info.data, we're going to say info equals get app data, And then we have to use the same handle because we need to make sure that we're actually calling the right thing. And then we just write data. And then we're going to put a semicolon on it because it's going to pull. So now, if we run this function, so I'm going to close this figure. So if we run this and we click next, info.data, structure, contents, reference, from a non-structure array. Okay, so that means that because I named this info, it's going to give me a weird thing. It's info.info. So we do it this way. Oh, there is no thing called data. It's called info. That's me just forgetting things. Sorry, everybody. So run this again. We're going to click the next button. And now all that data is right there. So that's not really what we want to be showing, but right now that's what we have. So now we need to actually get this data to do something. So now we have it, and now we've done something, but now we also know that this counter right here is 0. Now to index something, we know that we need to use a counter that's not 0. So if we do info.counter equals info.counter plus 1, this is the same as if you're just using a regular counter, we're going to add 1 to that counter. And now we're going to go through info data, and we know by looking at plotting data, so if I just load plotting data here, if we look at this, we have a 6 by 50, and so we know this one and this one reference the x and y coordinates for the first. This is the second one for x and y for the third one. So we know that we need 2 rows. We need to have an x row and we need to have a y row because we need a plot. So what we're going to do here is we're going to write info.data.info.counter, comma, all of the columns, and we're going to name this x. So we have all the columns, and that's our x's for whichever row we're on. I'm going to do the same thing for the y's, except we need to do +1 because it's 1 lower. And then let's say plot x comma y. This is plotting like any other thing. So we can do run now plus next, and we get all this weird data. And that looks really weird. That's also because it's creating lines from just what we have. So if we wanted to make this different, and we can make it where it's just points, we could do xy, comma, OR, and then run this again. Next. And we're getting all these little dots now. So that's a bunch of points. I think it's about 50 points of x and y coordinates. And then if we do this again, it'll give us the next 50. And it'll keep giving us, it's fairly similar, so it's just going to keep going through the same things. So then we'd have to do the same thing with the previous, except with the previous button, we'd want to be going through the button like previously, what we went through before. So your counter is just going to change on this. I'm not actually going to write that for you because you guys need to figure out how to do that. But now you know how to get all the information. The one thing we didn't go through is how to move all the information you just got in here, because 1 and 2, if you noticed, it wasn't going through any more data than what we had. When we ran this the first time, this next, it stays on 1 and 2, right? You know, this number is not changing. The reason that's not changing is because we never set our data again. So it's still seeing the original data we set up here, which is still just a counter of 0. So we need to reset our info. So now we have to do the same thing we did before. So handles.figure1. Let me spell figure 1 right. And then do info and then info again. So all of this now sets that data again. So now if we run this and I click next, it'll be that first one, second one, see how crazy that looks, and then third one. So all these numbers are completely different, and so that's what we're trying to show. But if we click previous, nothing's going to happen because we didn't add anything to the previous. So now all you know that you have to do is you need to always set your data. So set it at the bottom, get it in the beginning. So you want to be working with the amount of data you pulled in from the very beginning, so just keep working with that. And then you're going to have set app data at the very end to set it to use in the next thing and the next time you push the button. So that's pretty much all you need to know. But now I'm going to show you a couple of examples with the actual GUI you're going to be creating, and I'm just going to run through it really quickly. So what your GUI is supposed to do is this. So we have all of this information here. So this is very similar to what we already had. So if we click the next button, well, actually let's click linear. So we have this drop-down menu. This is linear, power, and exponential. This is something you're going to have to figure out how to do a drop-down menu. I'm going to help you out real quick. It's called a pop-up menu on your GUI and guide. So you're going to want to use the pop-up menu. So look up how to use the pop-up menu. So if I click linear on this pop-up menu, that's our first data that you saw originally in the previous one that I was doing. And then we're going to show it with the power. So this is doing polyfit on each of these, and then exponential. Now we're going to want to move to the next data. So if we click linear again, now we're on data set 2. So we have linear, we have power, and we have exponential. Now we can go to data set 3. Linear, power, exponential. And we can go backwards too. And I can look at linear and power of data set 2 again. Now you're going to notice in the background of this, you have a bunch of warnings. All this means that the data itself, when it's using the polyfit, it's just creating imaginary parts with X and Y's. And so do not worry, that's not an actual issue. That's just a warning statement. So I can go through all these different ones, and I should be able to go forwards and backwards and look at any information. And it should give me the exponential, power, and linear curve of all of them. And so that is all we have for today. And I hope you enjoyed this, and have a good day.